The dust on Mars smelled like iron and old teeth. Sho had read about it in the mission briefing. The oxidized regolith, the perchlorate salts, the way the thin atmosphere pressed against your faceplate like something alive trying to get in. He had read about it, and then he had gone to Mars anyway. They all had. 15 people who owed too much to say no, loaded into a ship named for the insects stitched into their blood, fired at a dead red world with extermination orders and a bonus clause they were quietly told most of them wouldn't collect. The ship was called Bugs 2. The first one never came back. He stood at the base of the landing ramp in the Martian morning, the sun smaller than he expected it to be, and watched his crewmates fan out across the rust-colored plain. They moved in pairs like they'd been trained to, helmets up even though the suit seals had confirmed breathable air levels 3 minutes ago. Old habits. Human habits, Captain Donatello K. Davis had told them that first morning. Don't let Mars trick you into thinking it's safe. It has never been safe. It was not safe before we touched it. It is especially not safe now that had been 6 days ago. Sho walked beside Yuna, and he did not hold her hand because they were professionals, and because she would have said something sharp and affectionate about it, and he would have laughed, and the laughter would have meant he was still capable of it. She was 23 years old. She had grown up in Osaka, in a prefecture that flooded every summer now, in a house where the watermarks were higher every year. She had taken the bug surgery at 19 to clear her family's debt. He had taken it at 17 in a juvenile facility, for reasons that the mission dossier listed without judgment. The bug's procedure, what they had done to themselves. The surgeons had explained it with charts and schematics, but the reality of it was simpler and stranger. They had threaded insect genetics into human DNA like embroidery thread through old cloth. And what grew from that threading was something that was still human in the places that counted. Still scared, still capable of grief, still reaching for connection in the dark, but augmented, modified, carrying inside their cells the possibilities of something with compound eyes and chemical weapons and exoskeletal armor. You injected the activating compound, and the transformation ran through you like a fever dream. What came out the other side was still you, just more. Sho's base was the Asian giant hornet. He had the files. He had seen the photographs of what he became when activated. He had only done it twice, in controlled environments, and both times had left him shaking for an hour afterward. Not from the physical toll, but from the dissonance, the feeling of looking at his own hands and finding something else there. They had not yet been ordered to activate. Mars stretched around them in all directions, terracotta and rust, boulder fields and shallow craters. The terraformed vegetation hugging the low ridges in green-gray strips that looked like wounds that hadn't healed clean. It was ugly and enormous and silent in the way that only places without birds could be. Yuna stopped walking. Sho stopped beside her. At the edge of the boulder field, standing in the full Martian sun, was a terraformar. He had seen photographs. Everyone had seen photographs. The pictures sent back by Bugs 1 before all transmission ceased, the blurry satellite imagery, the classified military assessments with their cold taxonomic language, bipedal, chitin-plated cranium, estimated height 2.1 to 2.4 meters, reflexes beyond current human baseline capability. He had studied those photographs for 6 months. He thought he was prepared. He was not prepared. The thing standing 70 meters away had started as a cockroach. He had to keep reminding himself of that, even now, even as it stood there looking at nothing with its black plate-like eyes. It had started as something a child would step on without thinking. Evolution on an accelerated trajectory, the radiation, the alien microbiome of the introduced fungi, centuries of selection pressure on a world that had no other large life to compete with, had built from that beginning something that stood upright and had a body that moved with the controlled economy of something that had never needed to be afraid of anything. Yuna reached for the injection kit at her belt. "Wait," Sho said. She looked at him. It hasn't moved. The terraformar had not moved. It stood at the edge of the boulders and looked at them with its flat black eyes and did not move. There was something in the posture that Sho could not fully name, and later, much later, in the years when he would wake at 3 in the morning and lie staring at ceilings, he would return to this moment and try to identify it. Curiosity, he would eventually conclude. It had looked at them the way something looks when it is trying to understand what it is seeing. That had lasted 11 seconds. Then it crossed the 70 meters between them in something that was not quite running. It was faster than running, something that used the lighter Martian gravity to cover ground in flat, brutal bounds, and Sho was still forming the thought to inject when it reached Yuna and snapped her neck with one hand. The sound was very quiet. She fell, and the terraformer looked at what it had done with the same flat expression it had worn while standing at the boulders. And then it looked at Sho, and Sho's hand was on the injection kit, and his body was remembering all of its training, and for a moment, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, an eternity. The two of them were simply looking at each other across the 12 meters that remained. The terraformer turned and walked back into the boulders. Sho stood where he was for a long time, then he picked up Yuna's body and carried her back to the ship. He had expected grief. What he got was something more procedural, a cold, mechanical process of placing her body in the medical bay, securing the restraints, pulling the sheet up, because there was no protocol for how to treat a dead crewmate on Mars, so he defaulted to the only ritual he could remember from the disaster response training. Then he sat on the corridor floor outside the medical bay with his back against the bulkhead and did not cry. Because the crying wouldn't come, because his body had decided to defer it for later. The rest of the crew was gathered in the main hold. He could hear them through the door. Captain Davis's low rumble, Zhang Mingming's careful, precise voice cycling through tactical assessments, Thean, whose quiet he could somehow hear even through steel and insulation. When Sho came in, the room went quiet. A man named Kang stood up from the far bench. He was large and still, and had the kind of face that looked like it had decided things about people before they opened their mouths. He had been the loudest voice in briefings on Earth, the one who asked the hard questions that no one in the room had wanted to ask. And he had asked them without embarrassment, because he did not seem to feel embarrassment, or many other things that most humans felt. She lived in debt, Kong said. She died in debt. The government will classify her as a mission casualty and process her paperwork in 6 to 9 months. Her family will get a form letter. He looked at Sho. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you look like a man who's about to let grief make him stupid. Sho said nothing. We can't go home without completing the mission. No completion, no pay. No pay, and everyone in this room dies of other things over the next few years. Debt collection, poverty, the floods, the camps. Kang looked around at the assembled crew. We didn't come here to die. We came here to kill things and go home so. He picked up his injection kit from the bench beside him. I will go out and begin the extermination. I am best suited. The captain agrees. Captain Davis, a large American man with gray at his temples, and the posture of someone who had spent 20 years deciding which hills were worth dying on, nodded once. He's right about his suitability. Kang, don't go alone. I won't be alone, Kang said, and put something in his voice that closed the argument. He was alone 17 minutes later, walking out across the rust-colored plain. They watched on the external cameras. Sho watched alongside them, his hands folded on the table in front of him, not looking away. Kang stopped 300 meters out and injected. The transformation took 45 seconds. It always took 45 seconds. The surgeons had been consistent about that, something to do with the activation cascade. And what emerged from that 45 seconds was still identifiably Kang, but also something else, something that moved differently, something that had the carapace structure of the ground beetle across its shoulders, and the chemical sensory array threading through its modified nasal passages. He scanned the terrain. He turned once, twice. The terraformar had been behind him the entire time. No one in the room made a sound as the cameras tracked what happened next. It was very fast. Kang was good. He was the best of them. Captain Davis had said so, and the captain did not say things he didn't mean, but good, on Mars, in the year of their Lord 2599, meant something smaller than anyone had planned for. The camera feed cut out when it lost the signal. They found what was left when the second camera drone passed over the area 20 minutes later. Zhang Mingming, who had the Mantis procedure and was the crew's tactical second, said, "It carried his head back." The thing had carried Kang's severed head back toward the ship and left it at the base of the landing ramp like a message, and then retreated. Sho understood something then that the briefings had not managed to convey. The terraformars were not acting on instinct. They were communicating. They just weren't doing it in any language that worked in both directions. That evening, while Captain Davis was coordinating perimeter sensors and the rest of the crew was running contingency planning, Sho sat beside the medical bay door again and thought about the 11 seconds. He thought about what he had seen in those 11 seconds. Not the violence, the moment before the violence. The flat black eyes moving between him and Yuna, the slight shift in posture, the quality of attention. He had been trained to kill things. He had been trained to transform into something that could kill things more efficiently. Nobody had trained him for what came before the killing, for that narrow window when two species that had never met were looking at each other, and one of them was making a calculation that the other couldn't read. He fell asleep in the corridor and dreamed of the Hornet. He dreamed of what he became when activated, the weight of his own altered body, the clarity of the compound eye processing, the way everything organized itself into threat, neutral, and teetered in a taxonomy that had no room for 11 seconds of consideration. The Hornet did not hesitate. It was one of the things that made it useful. He woke to alarms. It had gotten into the ship. Later, the forensics would suggest it had come up through the lower cargo hatch, that the magnetic seal had a frequency that the terraformers, who used a form of low-frequency vibration to communicate between themselves, had learned to disrupt. Later, in the moment, all Sho knew was the alarm, and the sound of fighting in the lower corridor, and the crew scrambling for injection kits. Maria reached it first. She was small and fast, and had the mantis derivative procedure that gave her the blade structure forearms, and she came around the corridor junction already transformed, and she was very good, and it was not enough. The thing in their corridor was bigger than the one in the field. This was not coincidence. Sho would come to understand later that the terraformers had variations, specializations, something like castes, that the mission briefings had criminally undersold. This one moved through the corridor with its shoulders nearly brushing the walls and hit Maria with a force that Sho felt through the deck plating. Captain Davis came past him at a run, and the captain was already injecting, and what Captain Donatello K. Davis became when he activated was something vast and specific and terrible in the way that only humans can be terrible, which is to say, with full awareness of what it is doing, and doing it anyway because the alternative is worse. Sho did not watch the captain fight. He moved to Maria, who was down but breathing, and put her arm over his shoulders and pulled her back toward the main hold. Everyone out, Davis said, between impacts that shook the corridor. His voice was still his, still recognizable. Still the voice of a man who had made decisions, and was making another one right now. Emergency egress now. Sir, someone started. I will hold it here, Sho. The captain did not turn around. He was busy. Your lead. Get them out. Sho looked at the back of the captain's altered form, at the barely contained scale of what Davis had become, at the terraformar that was fighting back with everything it had and was still struggling. He thought, we cannot leave him. He thought he knows we cannot leave him. He thought he has already accounted for that. Everyone, Sho said. Move. They lost 2 more getting to the emergency vehicles. Tejas, who had the propulsion-capable locust procedure, and whose legs could produce thermal thrust in the low Martian atmosphere, was the one who got the remaining 8 of them out of the ship's radius. He ignited and went straight up into the thin air and came down 200 meters clear, and then went back for the next group and the next. And on his 4th trip, his body had too much of the activating compound in it, and the transformation ran past the point of return. He came down wrong. He was still alive when Sho reached him. You made it, Tejas said, which was both the thing he said and the thing he meant, and there was nothing wrong with the way he said it. It was a complete sentence. Sho held him in the Martian dust, and Tejas said very quietly, something in Thai that Sho did not speak and did not need to, and then he was gone. Sho sat there for a while. The other survivors stood a few meters away and did not hurry him, because they were human beings and they understood what this was. 7 left. 7 out of 15. The Martian sky was deepening toward its evening color, a bruised violet blue that the briefing materials had called aesthetically striking, in a sentence that now seemed to belong to a different universe entirely. The old ship, Bugs 1, the one that had never come back, the one whose crew had sent the transmission that started all of this, was 11 kilometers northeast. Thean, who had navigational wetware and the Locust Procedure's terrain mapping capability, had confirmed it was still structurally intact from the orbital survey data. If it still had power, if the systems hadn't degraded beyond use. If we move, Sho said. To a ship that failed, Haruma said. Haruma was their second pragmatist, a quiet man with a gift for identifying problems without offering solutions, which Sho was coming to understand was its own kind of courage. The courage to see clearly even when clarity offered nothing comfortable. To a ship that might work, Sho said. Yes, Sho looked at him. You have a better option, tell me now. Haruma looked out at the Martian plane. "No," he said, and picked up his kit. They walked 11 kilometers in Martian gravity, which was kind to human legs in the mechanical sense and murderous in every other. The suit's oxygen recyclers were rated for 22 hours of field use, and they were at 9 hours when they started walking. Sho counted bodies and oxygen and time as they moved, the arithmetic of survival clicking over in some part of his mind that was apparently not available to grief, because grief was being stored somewhere else for later, for a time when arithmetic wouldn't be immediately necessary. Ridan walked on his left. She was 19 and had grown up in Kazakhstan and had government-debt insect procedures that the government of Kazakhstan had paid for and then invoiced her for afterward. The recursive cruelty of institutions, the way they gave you tools to survive and then charged you for the tools. She was quiet and fast and had twice, during the run from the ship, done things that kept other people alive without acknowledging she had done them. John walked on his right. An American who hadn't said much on the entire mission, which Sho had initially mistaken for reserve, and which he now understood was a particular kind of attentiveness. John was a person who listened before he spoke, and had nothing to say when listening was enough. Behind them, Zhang Ming, still tactical even now, scanning the terrain in 30-degree sweeps at regular intervals. Jaina, who was injured and walking anyway. Yang Huan, who was holding Jaina's left arm and matching her pace without comment. Hiruma, bringing up the rear, watching the back trail. And Thean, ranging ahead 20 meters out, the locust procedure giving his legs a barely perceptible spring even in standard mode, the kind of movement that looked almost wrong until you stopped expecting it to look human. Thean had said almost nothing since they left the ship. He had given directions twice in the precise clipped phrases of someone running navigational calculation as a background process, and otherwise had been silent. Sho had served with Thean for 8 months before launch, and understood his silence the way you understand the silence of people you know well, not as absence but as presence. Thean was thinking. He would say what he was thinking when he had decided it was worth saying. He said it when they were 6 kilometers out, stopped at the edge of a crater rim to check their bearings. "We have a problem," Thean said. "New one, or the existing inventory," Sho said. "The oxygen. We have enough for 7 people to walk 11 kilometers. A pause. "We had enough. We have 6 kilometers left." Sho worked the numbers and found where they went wrong. Jaina's suit recycler had taken impact damage in the escape, was running at partial efficiency, burning oxygen faster than the displayed readout was showing. The suits could compensate for each other up to a point, could redistribute, but that point had margins. 7 people into 6 kilometers of oxygen would only work with a certain arithmetic that none of them spoke aloud. Thean spoke it. 1 person could go ahead, scout the ship. The suit recyclers in Bugs 1 would still be functional if the hull is intact. "You volunteering?" Haruma said. Thean looked at Sho. Sho looked back. "No," Sho said. "We reconfigure the suit distribution. Double up on recycler output for Jaina. Move faster. Sho." "We reconfigure," Sho said. He was not angry. He was not performing certainty he didn't feel. He was simply making the decision, the same way Captain Davis had made his, with full knowledge of its weight. Nobody goes alone. Not anymore. We've seen what alone costs. There was a long silence on the Martian crater rim. Then Reedon took out her South's external recycler module and began the field reconfiguration that they'd been told in briefing was possible, but not recommended. Thean watched her for 3 seconds and then did the same. They moved faster. Bugs 1 was half buried in regolith on its port side, tilted at an angle that suggested a rough landing or a structural failure or both. The access hatch on the starboard side was intact. The emergency power cells had not fully discharged in 22 years because the Martian cold was excellent at preserving things it had no reason to destroy. Sho got the hatch open with his suit's manual override, and they went in one at a time, and the air inside was cold enough that it condensed on every surface when they unsealed their helmets, turning the dead ship briefly, strangely soft-looking, as if it were breathing. The crew of Bugs 1 had not left behind what Sho expected to find. The briefings had implied a massacre, and there had been a massacre. The evidence was there, and he acknowledged it quickly and moved on. But what the briefings had not conveyed was what you found beside the evidence. A photograph tucked into a navigation console panel. A jacket folded over a seat with the care of someone who intended to return for it. A handwritten maintenance log that ended 3 days before the transmission cutoff with a notation about a stuck valve in the recycling system. Because human beings are specific and stubborn even at the end of the world, and they do not stop maintaining their equipment just because something terrible is coming. Sho found the log and read the last entry in it. He did not know whose handwriting it was. He did not need to know. Ship's functional, Zhang Mingming said from the engineering bay. Primary drive is cold, but the cells are at 62%. I can get it to launch capacity in. She ran the calculations. 4 hours. What do we need to hold this position for 4 hours, Sho said. Perimeter sensors, Haruma said. Emergency door seals. Someone watching the external cameras. They had all of that. They had 6 people who were still functional, and 1 who was injured, and a ship that might fly in 4 hours, and 11 kilometers of Martian desert between them, and the thing that had started this. What they did not have, any certainty that the terraformers did not know they were here. What they did not have, any certainty about anything, which was the condition they had been operating in since the moment Yuna fell, and which had not, Sho noticed, killed them yet. They came 3 hours and 40 minutes in. Shows at the external cameras when the sensors lit up. Not 1, not a dozen. He counted until he stopped counting because the number had exceeded what was useful to know. And then he said, "Seal the hatches," and everyone in the ship who could move was already moving because they had been military trained, and the briefings had covered this exact scenario, which everyone in the briefings had privately thought was a scenario they would never face. He thought about the ship. He thought about what he knew about cockroaches, which was more than he had ever wanted to know, because the briefing materials had included an extensive xenobiology section that he had read 4 times in the weeks before launch. He thought about oxygen. He thought about the terraformers' biology, that they needed atmosphere too, that the Martian air was breathable for them as well, that they were not immune to its composition, only adapted to it. He thought, fire, not fire the way you think of fire on Earth, where it burns and spreads. Fire the way it behaves in a sealed environment with a specific atmospheric composition. An exothermic reaction that consumed oxygen faster than the environment could replenish it. A fire inside a closed space with terraformers in it would not burn them. Their chitin was heat resistant. The briefings had covered that too. But it would deplete the oxygen. And they breathed, and anything that breathed could be suffocated. He pulled up the ship's internal schematic. "Zhang," he said, "the emergency vent system. Can you run it in reverse?" A pause. "Yes." "If I start a fire in the cargo bay and you run the vents in reverse, what happens to the oxygen in the sealed sections?" Zhang was quiet for 4 seconds. "It redistributes. Pulls from the forward compartments into the bay. If the fire is big enough, then the forward compartments run low, below viable threshold. For anything biological that breathes." Zhang looked at him. "It would affect us too. We have the suit recyclers." Sho looked around at the crew. 2 hours of use left in the recyclers. Maybe 3 with reconfiguration. He looked at the camera feeds, the terraformers, dozens of them, arraying themselves around the ship in patterns that were too organized to be instinct. "We don't need 3 hours. We need them to breach the cargo hatch, and then we need them inside long enough for the atmosphere in that section to drop. And if they don't breach? If they wait?" Sho looked at the camera. The terraformers at the edge of the frame were doing something with their hands. A repetitive gesture, low frequency. Communicating. Planning. "They're not going to wait," he said. "Whatever they're doing out there is them deciding how to come in. We have maybe 20 minutes. The crew looked at each other in the particular way that people look at each other when they have run out of objections and the only thing left is the doing of it. Thien was already at the cargo bay entrance, already thinking through the sequence. Sho could see it in the way he was standing, that stillness that meant calculation was running underneath it. "I can hold the cargo bay," Thien said, "long enough for the atmosphere to cycle. You'd be in there with them." "My procedure," Thien said simply. The locust modification included a metabolic suppression capability. The body could drop its oxygen consumption to a fraction of baseline under combat conditions. It wasn't immunity, it was math. 35 minutes at the lowered threshold. That's enough. Tien. Tien looked at him with the expression of a man who has done his arithmetic carefully and is at peace with what it told him. "You and Haruma are the most likely to survive what comes after this. You're the ones who need to carry what happened here back to Earth." He paused. "Someone has to carry it." "Then let me." "No," quietly, firmly. The way certainty sounds when it has nothing to prove. "You have a hornet in you, Sho. Hornets are for what comes after. This is a locust job." Sho stood in the corridor of a dead ship on Mars and understood that some arguments are not arguments at all. They are the moment you recognize that another person has already made their decision, and the only thing left for you is to receive it. "All right," he said. Thean nodded. "Give me 10 minutes to set the ignition sequence." He paused, and something shifted in his face. Not sentimentality, but acknowledgement, one human being to another. "There's a family in Bangkok. A mother and 2 sisters. I have their address in my personal effects." He looked at Sho. "They should know." "They'll know," Sho said. Thean held out his hand, and Sho took it, and the handshake lasted longer than a handshake needed to last, and neither of them said anything else about it. The cargo bay breach came 18 minutes later, which gave them 2 minutes of margin. Sho watched on the internal cameras, in his sealed suit, with his recycler running, and he watched Thean work. The man moved through the cargo bay like something that had decided, at a cellular level, to be exactly what it was without apology. He had activated. Partial activation, controlled. The locust procedure giving his legs the spring, and his reflexes the insect speed without the metabolic spike that had taken Tejas at the end. And he fought with everything he had, which was considerable. And he fought with the specific efficiency of someone who is not fighting to win, but fighting to buy time, which is a different discipline entirely. The oxygen in the sealed section dropped. The gauges that Zhang was monitoring ticked downward. Thean was still moving at the 20-minute mark. At the 23-minute mark, he was not moving the same way, and Sho made himself watch because bearing witness was the only thing he could give him. At 26 minutes, the oxygen level in the cargo bay and connected sections hit the threshold that Zhang had calculated, and the terraformars began to falter. Not quickly, not cleanly, but perceptibly. The organized ferocity of them becoming uncoordinated, the strength that had made every individual encounter a catastrophe becoming uncertain, directed at nothing. Thean was on his knees. He looked at the internal camera, the one camera in the cargo bay, mounted in the corner, with the expression of someone who sees what they were looking for and found it exactly where expected. The camera was not a person. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking in the direction of the camera, which was the direction of the rest of them, and he was telling them something without sound in the only way available to him. Sho looked back. At 31 minutes, the cargo bay atmosphere was no longer viable. They flew Bugs 1 out at 03:47 Martian local time, 4 hours and 11 minutes after landing, with 5 crew members aboard. The launch was rough. The portside thruster had more corrosion than Zhang had estimated, and the compensation algorithms were working with 22-year-old software. And then it was smooth, and then they were in the black, and the red planet fell away beneath them. Sho sat in the navigator's chair. The original navigator of Bugs 1 had had a similar build and did not watch Mars recede. He watched the instruments because someone needed to, and because watching the instruments was something he could do right now without falling apart, and there would be time later to fall apart. There would be a whole life of, later in which to account for what had been spent here. Hiruma sat beside him, the only other survivor of the 15. Hiruma, who had wanted to be pragmatic about oxygen on the crater rim, and who had not been because Sho had decided differently and Hiruma had followed, and they had both survived, which did not make the decision obviously right and would not prevent Sho from examining it for the rest of his life. "Earth is going to ask questions," Hiruma said. "Yes. They're going to want to know what happened to the other 13. Yes. They're going to want to know if the mission was a success." Sho was quiet for a long time. Outside the viewport, the stars were the unblinking permanent stars of open space, cold and indifferent and present in enormous numbers. "Tell them," Sho said finally, "that we survived. That's not what they asked. It's what they need to know." He looked at the star field. "We went to Mars with nothing. We were in debt and we were expendable, and they sent us to a red planet with extinct insects in our blood and told us to kill things. And Yuna is gone, and Kang is gone, and Maria and Captain Davis and Tejas and Thean and all the rest of them, they're gone." He stopped, started again, and we came back anyway, 2 of us. Out of 15, we came back because that's what human beings do. His voice was steady. He was surprised to find it steady. "We find a way. We find a derelict ship that shouldn't fly, and we fly it. We make fire out of bad options. We make enough out of not enough." He paused. "Tell them we survived. Tell them the rest." The ship moved through the dark. Hiruma said, "They'll send another one, I know. They'll send a bigger one, better equipped. With more people, I know that too. And the terraformers will still be there. Sho finally looked away from the stars. He looked at his hands, his human hands. The hornet still dormant inside him, the procedure still threaded through his cells. The inheritance of every adaptation human beings had made across 100,000 years of deciding that dying was not going to be the thing that stopped them. Good, he said. The word sat in the cockpit of the old ship, quiet and complete and entirely without performance. And Haruma understood it because Haruma was human too. And humans always understood the particular timbre of the determination that comes after everything it costs to still be breathing. The stars did not care. The dark did not care. Mars was already a small red point in the aft cameras, dwindling. Sho did not watch it go. He was already thinking about what came next. So was the Hornet.